What's up, guys? Let's talk trial. I've been watching this Derek Chauvin trial, which is the police officer who's been accused of murdering George Floyd in Minneapolis. And I thought it was fitting to do some videos on that trial and things that we can take away from the trial to become better trial lawyers. And things that we can look at the trial and realize that maybe it should have been done differently. I have not watched the defense opening statement yet. I've caught the opening statement of the prosecution. I've caught a couple of witnesses. I'm basically working my way back until I watch the whole thing. But what I want to talk to you guys about today is the opening statement of the prosecution and what we can learn from it and how we can get better from watching an opening statement like that. And so the first thing that struck out to me from the prosecution's opening statement was the fact that really there was no proper use of primacy. The prosecutor got up there and was basically spending the first 5 minutes of the opening just like, I don't know. I don't know what he was doing, but I can tell you what he wasn't doing. He was not telling a story. He was not using the first minutes of the juror's attention span to deliver an impactful, powerful narrative. Instead, he got up there and he was talking about how you learn a lot about the Minneapolis Police Department, how police protect and serve, how police are good guys, like all this kind of stuff that, I mean, it definitely has a part to play in the trial because of the way that it has to get tried in order to appease certain jurors. But it definitely wasn't the most impactful portion of this trial. I think you don't have to be a lawyer to realize what the most impactful portion of this trial was, or of the events that are being tried was. And so that opening statement, there's no doubt, should have started with the proper use of primacy by telling a very compelling story of what happened to George Floyd. That really, I mean, I guess different trial lawyers could disagree about a whole bunch of different things, but in my mind, there really shouldn't be much disagreement about that fact. If you try a case where you're saying that somebody who had basically brutally murdered, that they're really, I cannot think of any more impactful portion to start to make use of your primacy than to start the scene, to start the opening as the murder's happening. So that's number one. The primacy was definitely not there. I haven't really watched the whole opening statement of the defense. I've seen basically first, 20 minutes of it. The defense also did not really have primacy or did not properly use their primacy in their opening statement. So I guess they're even there, but that's a problem. You know, as trial lawyers, we want to make sure that we make the most of our primacy because pretty much the first thing you tell the jury is going to have the highest impact on them, whether it is they're going to remember it more, whether it is it's going to get their attention piqued for everything else you're going to say, or whether it is it's going to be more persuasive. There's some disagreement as to what that means, but at the end of the day, there's no disagreement that primacy is a big thing, and you should definitely make the most of it. So that's the one thing, the first thing we can learn about it. The second thing we can learn about it, and this is something I have probably made like 3 videos by now, and it sucks to see it happening so often, especially to see seasoned trial lawyers, guys who probably tried a lot of cases, do this. And what this is they basically ignore the critical facts that are bad for their case. So the prosecutor gets up there and tells the whole story about, what they're going to prove and who's going to say what and this and that. And then he sets up basically a straw man, which is that George Floyd, while he had opiates in his system, the opiates did not cause his death because everybody knows that when you die from a opiate overdose, that's supposed to be like a peaceful death. That's supposed to be you pass out and then you go limp and you basically sort of go to sleep and never wake up, right? So you're not reacting in the way that they anticipate the video is going to show that George Floyd was reacting, right? The problem with that is that the prosecution omitted to tell the jury that there was meth in George Floyd's system that's going to come out in trial. It's going to be part of what the toxicology reports are going to show. And that's critical for 2 reasons. Number one, you didn't tell the jury that he had meth in his system, even though it's going to come out. So the jury's going to think you're lying to them, which it's probably fair. You probably intentionally decided you weren't going to tell them. So yeah, you are lying to them, which is not cool. And secondly, you set up your whole argument to defeat the defense's point that they're trying to make, but you set up that argument based on a false premise, which is that opiate OD doesn't look like that. And you didn't tell the jury that he also had meth in his system, thereby now the jury's going to think, well, he didn't tell me about that. Not only did he not tell me about that, but he set up this whole argument about how we know it wasn't drug related because the one drug that he told me he had in the system would not cause that reaction. But guess what? Meth is a stimulant. It could cause that reaction. So what are we talking about? So not a good look. Definitely should be handled differently. And if you're trying a case where there's going to be some bad facts in it, especially something like that, you better come out and tell the jury about it, and you put it in the best light that you can put it. But you definitely don't just not mention it and hope for the best. Hope that the jury's not going to learn about it, which is, I mean, I don't even know. That's to hope that in a big time murder trial, the defense is not going to bring out something like that. That's not a hope. That's a prayer. That's just not reality. So obviously that is going to come out, and it should be dealt with appropriately. The next thing we can learn from that opening statement is, so lawyers have a bad tendency to use a lot of big words. So you'd hear the prosecutor say stuff like respiration, unceremoniously, cardiac arrest, basically like there was like maybe 5 or 6 big words that sometimes I didn't understand what he was saying when he said some of his big words, and I'm a lawyer, right? So it's something to be careful with. You have to know that it's not that you think the jury's dumb, because obviously that's not what we think when we go into a trial, but it's the understanding that even if the jury knows what you're saying, just using a big word is going to require more mental power for the person who's hearing it than if you use a smaller word. Like if you keep it simple, it's going to require less bandwidth to stay with the story that you're telling, to stay with what the point that you're trying to make is. Whereas if you use big complicated words, even if people know what you're talking about, it's going to take them a while to get the definition basically in their head. So that was kind of a big deal. Not the most craziest thing. Obviously, it wasn't, we've seen some of these where the lawyer goes on and uses 35 big words. Every other word is a big word. That's a problem. This wasn't like that. He had a good tone. He had a good delivery to what he was saying. And so it wasn't overly distracting or like a big deal. But definitely, if you're talking about going to the next level, which is what we are all striving for, is how can I get better next time? What can I do better next time? And if you're going to try a case and you're sitting there and you have 5 or 6 big words you're going to use, maybe you go back and say, you know what, there's no need to use these 5 or 6 big words. We're gonna streamline this process and get better at it. So that is obviously a point to be taken away from the opening statement. And finally, the last thing that I took away from the opening statement, something that we can take with us and get better at, is the explanation for the cause of death didn't really make a lot of sense. The prosecutor said cardiopulmonary arrest, which means you stop breathing and your heart stops. And then he goes on to say that that's pretty much how everybody dies, right? Like, hey, it's cardiopulmonary arrest. When you die, you stop breathing and your heart stops. And that sounds like it makes sense when you're just first told that, right? Like if you just hear that, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then, as it's going to happen during the trial, there's going to be evidence from medical examiners who are going to talk about how they go in there and determine causes of death. And there's a list, and which the prosecution did talk about the list, but it actually was addressed in a way that defeated the point, but I wasn't quite sure that the prosecution was following what they were doing. So they bring out the list and they say, look, the medical examiner goes out there and he has to determine the cause of death and the manner of death, right? And the cause of death could be suicide, homicide, undetermined, all that kind of stuff. And then the manner of death portion, which they didn't really go into it too much, in the manner of death, the ME is going to try to put together how the death happened, meaning was the person stabbed, was the person shot, did the person get asphyxiated, did the person suffer a heart attack, that kind of stuff. The ME, their job It's not to go in there and write, oh yeah, he died because his heart and his lungs stopped, and that's how every other human being dies no matter what. And so it's what we always write. That's just not reality. That's just not true. That's just not what the jury's going to hear when it comes down to the evidence. And it doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. If you think about it, if you're going to try this case to the jury, you can't really expect to go up there and tell them that the cause of death is the same thing that everybody dies from, and that you have a medical examiner who's specifically trained to find the cause of death and the manner of death, and that guy or lady is just writing, oh, Mr. Floyd died of the same thing everybody always dies from, so why am I here? We know everybody dies from heart stopping and the lung stopping, so why is there me there? Like, what was he there to do or she there to do, right? That doesn't make any sense. And so it's a big problem. It's kind of along the same lines of not telling the jury about the bad facts and setting up the straw man with the drugs. It's an attempt to pretend that your case doesn't have any problems, and it's an attempt to sell a version of the problem that's not really what the evidence is going to show. So the reality should be, if you're going to try that case, if I'm trying that case, I'm not getting up there and trying to pretend to the jury that George Floyd died of everything everybody else dies from, and we just don't know basically what happened. As far as the medicals, trust what I'm saying as to what happened, but the medicals are a little shaky. He just died from what everybody dies from, right? I'm trying this case. I got to figure out, number one, how bad is that medical testimony going to be? And I got a feeling the medical testimony is going to be pretty bad, meaning that whatever was found in the initial autopsy is not what the prosecution is going with, to the extent that it contradicts what the theory of the prosecution is. And so if that's the case, you got to get up there and either A, try to explain to the jury in the best light possible how those findings of the initial medical examiner were not complete because there was missing data or because there was things that medical examiner didn't get to look at, and how you hired a second medical examiner to come and do a more thorough review once all the facts were in, to get a more thorough medical conclusion or something like that. But you just can't pretend that because he died because the medical examiner found death to be cardiopulmonary arrest, that just doesn't mean anything. It's that's what everybody dies from. That doesn't mean anything. Don't worry about it, jurors. That's not something you should be paying attention to. Now, mind you, I'm not saying that this was a bad opening statement. This is not really what this video is about. This video is not about passing judgment on the quality of another trial lawyer's work. This video is more about basically understanding how some of what was done could have done better. And not for that case, obviously, because that case is getting tried and will be tried however it gets tried. But for the next case, if you're trying a case next, hopefully this is something you think about. I can tell you this is something that I always think about when I'm trying cases. I always think about, I'm not going to go out there and pretend I don't have bad facts. I'm not going to go out there and lie to the jury about what evidence is going to come out or not going to come out. I'm going to go out there and present the best evidence I have in the best light, and address the worst evidence that's going to come out in the best light, and then let the jury see it through that prism, especially if you're the plaintiff, especially if you go first, because the worst thing that can happen is you do your thing, and then the other side gets up and they tell the jury about everything that you didn't tell the jury. And then the jury's thinking that must be pretty terrible, number one. And number two, the jury's thinking that there's a very good chance that the reason you didn't tell him was intentional, and the reason you didn't tell him is because that destroys your case. And then it creates, number one, it challenges your own credibility, which is a big problem for you and your client. But number two, it creates additional value for the piece of evidence that you already knew was bad enough by itself, and now it's bad plus, right? So anyway, guys, that's it for now. I'm going to be making a couple more videos on this trial as I watch it. I'm a lot busier than I hope to be, and I have a trial that I'm supposed to do in a couple weeks. So it's going to be hit or miss depending on the amount of time that I have to put on it. But I'll definitely try to watch the whole thing. I'll definitely try to do some clips on the rest of the trial. I'll definitely do some clips on some of the witnesses that testified, and hopefully do some clips in the closing arguments, all of which should happen before the trial ends and before the verdict is in, because I think that once you hear the verdict, it colors the way that you look at the evidence. So I like to have my my objective analysis of my cases before the verdict is in. And so I like to do the same for other trials that I'm watching, and then kind of think about whether some of the stuff I thought had any actual bearing on what the verdict was. So anyway, guys, that's it for now. I'll catch you again next time.